USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Persephone and Cassandra, Atlas and Prometheus, oligarchy, plutocracy, satire, irony, hubris, nemesis, pathos, catharsis, sour grapes and blowing hot and cold, opening Pandora's box and leaving no stone unturned, the myths, tales and concepts of ancient Greece echo and reach into every aspect of modern life. Often misunderstood, frequently romanticized, and sometimes deliberately twisted. To understand their origins and truth is to get a real glimpse into the universal themes that connect us to the past and to each other. This is their story.
Άμα θέλεις μάνα δίρε με, άμα θέλεις μάνα δίρε με, πάλι εγώ θα βγαίνω στην αυλή για να βλέπω τον Αλεξανδρή.
Welcome to Podyssey. I'm Alex Andreou. Each week we will take one myth, one concept, person, place or theme from ancient Greece, take it apart, figure out its inner workings, trace its influence, juice it for its wisdom, reimagine, update, and put it back together all shiny and new. Many of you have asked for a way to support the show. Season 1 is free, a gift from me to you. I have, however, started to plan, write and fundraise for Season 2 of Podyssey. 20 brand new episodes. So head over to coffee at ko-fi.com/Podyssey and become part of the crew from as little as £5 a month. If you want another season, commission it. And tell the world about the show. You are my only billboard. Today our journey takes us to the ancient city of Troy to meet the priestess, the princess, the prophetess, Cassandra. There is an elegant symmetry to Cassandra being misunderstood still, millennia later, as a symbol for pessimism, a prophet of doom. But that wasn't her curse at all. Her curse was to have true insight and yet be unable to get those around her to listen. And is the reason we prioritize some voices over others not the central existential question at a time when real knowledge struggles to make itself heard over a chorus of populism? What wooden horses have we let through our city's gates? On the shore of Asia Minor lies the gleaming city of Troy, elegant, opulent, rich, everything the Greeks across the water aspired to be. King Priam and Queen Hecuba, or Hekavi, are celebrating the birth of their little baby girl, the sister of Prince Hector, Princess Cassandra, their second child. Only she's not their second child. She's their third. Their second is Paris. But the night before he is born, Hecuba has a terrible nightmare. She dreams that she is giving birth to a flaming torch. The palace sages advise the king and queen that the infant must be put to death as soon as he is born, but unable to kill their own flesh and blood, they spare the child, and he is raised by the herdsman Aielos. When Cassandra is just a baby, she is left in the temple of Apollo, god of light, music, healing, and prophecy, to be blessed. When they go to retrieve the child in the morning, they are confronted with a strange and pretty terrifying sight. The little baby girl is found with sacred serpents crawling all over her, their forked tongues licking her eyes and ears, giving her the gift of sight. Believing this to be an omen, the princess is raised in the service of Apollo. She's tormented by visions and oral phantoms that she cannot interpret. It is like she can see and hear the past, present and future all at the same time. The only place where she can get relief, where the visions stop, is Apollo's temple, so she spends much of her day there. She often even sleeps there. By her late teens, she has become his most devout and knowledgeable priestess. But Cassandra is also incredibly beautiful. Flaming red hair and eyes the colour of runny honey, with a fierce intelligence burning in them. One night as she sleeps by his altar, Apollo sees her and falls hopelessly in love with her. Problem was, priestesses back then were a bit like nuns. They were married to their god. Chastity was a pretty essential part of the job description, and there was no sub-clause that provided a loophole to exempt dalliances with the god himself in human form.
Now, fellers, I'd like to tell you something that ain't very new. If you want to know how to get along with the girl...
But the Olympians had big issues with informed consent. No as an answer did not really compute for the immortals. Apollo continued to pursue Cassandra relentlessly. In an attempt to seduce her, he offers her any gift that she asks for.
But never take no for an answer. Kiss her whenever you can.
More than anything, Cassandra wants the gift of prophecy, to be able to interpret the visions that have plagued her throughout her young life, the ability to put her mind in order. Apollo happily obliges in the belief this is a pretty straightforward trade. But when Cassandra continues to refuse him, furious but unable to take back the boon he has granted, he begs a single kiss, during which he spits in her mouth, poisoning his gift, cursing her words, never to be believed. What follows is relatively predictable even for someone without oracular abilities, a life of watching slow-motion disasters and being dismissed as hysterical for trying to stop them, a life of being gaslighted and othered and excluded because, let's be honest, who'd want to be around all that drama or all that wisdom? A life of please don't, followed by, well, I did try. It is at that moment that Paris returns to Troy to reclaim his royal heritage. He is welcomed by everyone except Cassandra, who can see the entire saga play out in her mind's eye. She begs her parents not to take him in. She begs them not to send him on a diplomatic mission to Sparta. And when he comes back having, depending on your source, kidnapped, seduced, or eloped with Queen Helen of Sparta, soon to become known as Helen of Troy, she warns them of the catastrophic conflict we know today as the Trojan War. In vain. The final chapters of Cassandra's life are especially violent. She tries to warn the Trojans not to take the beautiful wooden horse left behind by the Greeks. Nobody listens, of course. She runs at the horse with an axe and a torch, but is taken away and told to stop spoiling their victory banquet. Later that night, Greeks climb out of the horse and let the rest of the army into the city by cover of darkness. During the slaughter that follows, Cassandra takes refuge in the temple of Athena, only to be dragged away and sexually violated by the Greek so-called hero, Ajax the Lesser, to distinguish him from Ajax the Great. Not hard to see why that prick had a chip on his shoulder. Cassandra is then given to Agamemnon when the spoils are distributed, king of Mycenae and leader of the entire Greek army, as his palaki, or concubine. She is brought back to Greece, to Agamemnon's palace, but his wife Clytemnestra, who has never forgiven him for sacrificing their daughter to get a favourable start to the war, and who has been running the city solo pretty damn well for 10 years, and who now has a new lover, is not about to welcome them. The end comes much like what has preceded it. Cassandra can see it all unfold. She can see Agamemnon butchered in his bed. She can see her own awful murder. She tries to warn everyone and is ignored. You know, I never said beware of Greeks bearing gifts. That is a lie, she tells the people of Mycenae gathered outside the palace as she walks in to her death. I said, beware of gifts. After the break, in conversation with expert guests, I try to fathom how, when, and why the myth of Cassandra mutated from one of unheeded wisdom to one of unnecessary pessimism.
This message is brought to you by Abercrombie Kids, where the activewear is made for every summer activity, so your mini-me can bring their personal best. Summer days are always an adventure, from day camp to rec leagues and pool days. Abercrombie Kids has the shorts, tees, and swim to keep them comfy and keep up with them. Get everything for the entire summer at Abercrombie Kids. Shop in-store, online, or in the app.
That moment of her being dragged away from the altar of Athena, often by her hair, the statue of the goddess so horrified it bursts its solid form to look away, deserves closer attention, because it is ubiquitous as the depiction of Cassandra, from pottery of the classical Greek period and frescoes in Pompeii to Renaissance masters and the lush violence of Solomon J. Solomon's towering painting. I spoke to archaeologist Alexandra Andreou.
Well, Cassandra is often depicted in ancient Greek vases, mainly the ones we have from the 5th century before Christ, at the time of her violation by Ajax, the moment that she approaches the altar of Athena's temple in Troy and the hero appears. The altar of an Athenian temple is a place that's considered an asylum. So Athena sent then a storm in revenge, because that was an action that it was of utmost disrespect for her, offense for her. So most of the Greek fleet was actually sunk as it returned home.
I found myself coming back again and again to the fact that Cassandra takes refuge in Athena's temple. Not Apollo, the god she served, but Athena, the female representation of wisdom, who would found and protect Athens, the city whose dramatists tell us much of what we know about this myth. It is, I think, a detail as significant as it is neglected in most analyses, and a hint that this story is built around something more primal.
At the dawn of everything, in most of the known mythologies, Mother Earth is the dominant figure. She gave life in a world that humans were actually surrounded by Mother Nature. So the oldest sanctuaries in Greece were thus dedicated to these all-powerful goddesses that didn't have the names that they were attributed to them later. But as society progressed then from matriarchy to patriarchy, these kind of all-encompassing goddesses were broken up into smaller deities with different names and different attributes, split into separate figures to diminish the power of the great goddess. And then there is this rape, the violation against women that is argued by feminist theorists in archaeology, that it could be a demonstration on how a society constructs relationships between the male and the female, takes control, creating an imbalance in power and position, and allows then male power to be dominant over the female one.
When Cassandra walks to her death, knowing what is about to happen, she is a heroic figure, not a fatalistic or depressed one. This is the ultimate price paid by the seer, to know what is coming and meet it upright. It is an act of nobility, not self-destruction, and a major trope in so much of our modern storytelling, from Frodo Baggins in Lord of the Rings and Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, to Bizet's Carmen. Carmen reads her fate on the cards. In vain you shuffle and cut, she says. You can start 20 times, but the pitiless card will turn up again. Death. She knows that Don José's love will be their death. First me, then him, she says. And she's not just unable, but unwilling to change course. To even attempt to go against her fate, against her nature, would be an act of cowardice. Cassandra is not a pessimist. She doesn't lean into catastrophe as a philosophical choice. This isn't her curse at all. She's neither a glass half full nor glass half empty sort of gal. To label her a prophet of doom is to fail to acknowledge the tragic conflict at the centre of her being. Her knowledge is real and accurate. It could alter events, but she's either not heard or not believed, which begs the question, why? She drips with status. She's a priestess. She's a princess. She has authority, both secular and divine. Is it her womanhood that dooms her, or is it her clarity of sight? In other words, is being a woman in possession of knowledge that is the unforgivable sin here, or is she rejected for telling uncomfortable truths? The myth has mutated in its many depictions, from slasher films, the visceral reminder of how vulnerable bodies, especially female bodies, are, where final girl is never believed early enough, all the way back to the toga epics of the Cinecittà studios.
By what name, my lady, shall we know you?
Her name is Death.
Cassandra!
Forgive my sister. She suffers from an illness.
Wait!
She will bring the disaster I have prophesied. Her name will be written in letters of fire. Helen. Helen of Troy.
In Scream 2, Neve Campbell's character, Sydney, is actually rehearsing the role of Cassandra in an unidentified pastiche college play. She sees Ghostface among the masks of the chorus. The climax actually occurs on stage as the foam walls of Troy crumble.
No crime against gods or man have I committed, save to speak the truth. And each hideous vision born from my mind has come to pass. Troy has fallen, not by my hand or wish, but as I foresaw. So now, fate's vengeful eye is fixed on me.
No crimes have I committed, save to speak the truth. And yet again and again, female oracles and prophets in film pay a price for their foresight. They are victimized and marginalized. I spoke to film critic Linda Marrick.
More often than not, it's not really a good thing for a female protagonist to be seeing things. As far as more general portrayals of soothsayers, probably the most obvious of the more recent depictions in cinema would be the Matrix, where Gloria Foster's character in Matrix as the Oracle leads Neo into finding out who he is and opens the door to so many new things for him. She's deliberately passive. I mean, she's not as passive as she'd like us to think, as we discover later on in the movie, but she is deliberately neutral. She doesn't want to push him towards doing something. She gives him all the information and lets him get on with it. She's burdened with a gift. She doesn't want to have the gift, but, she needs to tell him this information. She's positively depicted, but she pays the price anyway, as most women who find themselves in that kind of situation.
Even a predictive algorithm represented by a black mother figure is ultimately targeted for her gift and purged by Agent Smith as faceless and replicatable as Ghostface. And plenty of times, Other women also join in the rejection of the seer.
In The Eyes of Laura Mars in 1978, the noir movie, Faye Dunaway plays a fashion photographer who specializes in depicting violent scenes in fashion within the artistic fashion photographer sort of realm. And then overnight, she develops an ability to see disturbing serial murders in visions. And again, it becomes a burden for her because she's suddenly being criticized by feminist groups for the depiction of those images. I mean, it's a movie made by a male director, so I'd say it's not without fault, the subtext of the movie. It's kind of saying she's so free and so open about nudity that she's being attacked by feminists, which isn't an entirely innocent sentiment, is it?
There is much to suggest then that Cassandra's womanhood is certainly a hindrance to her being heard. Even her name hints at this ambivalent conflict. Cassandra, in ancient Greek, comes from the verb kekasme, which means to shine, to excel over andron, men. She is destined then to excel over men. But isn't it bizarre to suggest that a society will ignore knowledge which is in its own self-interest? Not only is it not bizarre, it's common. Psychotherapist Dr. Ruth Smith talked to me about the concept of systemic ignorance.
In my experience, certainly professionally, the idea that women in particular, that their voices are not heard, is particularly redolent. So if we think of the Cassandra myth, the problem is twofold. One, that she's a woman, absolutely, but secondly, people simply do not want to know the truth. That actually it suits society at large, or it suits an organisation or even a family. We can look at this in a multi-level perspective, that it suits people not to know the truth if the truth is inconvenient. And so people can psychologically, subconsciously push away the truth if it doesn't fit their narrative or their comfort level. And oftentimes that can be something we call systemic ignorance. That resistance is increased if it is a woman who is speaking the truth.
There is a pretty direct acknowledgement, even in the Cassandra myth, that it is about knowledge plus gender. In many of the versions of her story, Cassandra has a twin brother, Helenus. After Apollo curses her to never be believed, she teaches her brother the gift of sight as a response. What could this part of the story signify, if not a recognition that bad news coming from a male copy of her might increase its chances of being believed? Do male characters in possession of mystical gifts get treated any better in cinema? The short answer is yes. Linda explains.
For men, psychic powers are usually seen as a good thing. And I have to say, in Dr. Sleep, the Stephen King adaptation, but this is true in many of his films, the prophet is at first not believed, but eventually he is given the benefit of being a male and allowed to give his predictions and allowed to sort of flourish. His gift is recognized eventually. To take it a step further, in a film called Nightmare Alley, which was then readapted by Guillermo del Toro, that film is about a fake soothsayer. So he is someone who purports to tell the future. As a fake soothsayer, he is perhaps even more powerful in a way than the real soothsayers. And because of it's all about credibility, it is really important that he is male. The information being delivered by a man matters more than information being accurate.
In many modern retellings of the myth, womanhood takes on another meaning too, that is also very present in the Cassandra myth, the anti-war voice. For men, war is an opportunity for immortality. They ride off to their heroic Valhallas. It is the mothers, the wives, the sisters, the daughters who are left behind to bury them, to grieve, to witness atrocity, to be violated and owned, to pick up the pieces and continue. In French dramatist Jean Giraudoux' 1935 play The Trojan War Will Not Take Place, translated by Christopher Fry as Tiger at the Gates, a peace treaty is actually negotiated by Hector at the behest of his mother Hecuba and his pregnant wife Andromache. The day before the start of the war, disaster can be averted. But Cassandra's cynicism turns out to be right. Once the tiger of war has been awakened, it will not go back to sleep before it's had its fill. The play opens with Andromache's line, The Trojan War will not take place, Cassandra. When Cassandra insists that it is too late, Andromache scolds her. Aren't you tired of seeing and foreseeing only horrors? To which Cassandra responds, I see nothing, I foresee nothing, I only take into account the stupidity of men. In Christa Wolf's feminist retelling, the novel Cassandra, the reasons are made even more explicit. Helen is, in fact, not in Troy at all. King Priam is manipulating the Greeks' erroneous belief that Paris took her in order to feed Trojan nationalism, to create bellicose sentiment, to bring about a war, thinking Troy will win. Cassandra guesses the truth, but the lie is too enormous, too terrible for anyone to believe. It is as if even the notion that we must listen to outsiders, to dissenting voices, is too challenging in itself. So we have degraded the myth of Cassandra from being one about the short-sightedness of those around her, of us, to one that is about her inability to convince, her shortcomings, her madness, her otherness. And we have really piled on the otherness. After the break, we discover the larger battle that was raging at the time and why it was in fact vital for Cassandra not to be believed.
This episode is brought to you by Heyday. Feeling stressed? Take a moment for yourself with Heyday. Stroll through rows of golden wheat, tend to cute barnyard animals, and discover the joys of a digital farm retreat. You don't have to hop in a car or catch a plane. Escape to the farm at the tap of a finger. With Heyday, you're not just tending to a farm, you're tending to yourself. Heyday. Search Heyday, that's Hay space DAY, in your favorite app store. Heyday is a free-to-play mobile game and offers optional in-app purchases and random rewards.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
These stories are nothing if not multi-layered, and here I must introduce another dynamic into the mix, Cassandra's foreignness. Not only is she a woman in possession of knowledge, she's a foreigner, a barbarian. Even that word itself, varvaros, which has come to mean uncivilized, savage, primitive, originally meant simply incomprehensible. It derives from an onomatopoeic dismissal of foreign languages, which to a Greek sounded something like var, 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 var. Aeschylus was the first of the great ancient Greek dramatists. In his telling of Agamemnon, this barbarian woman appears on stage. Now, the Athenian audience would fully expect Cassandra to be a kophon prosopon, a mute extra, as all foreigners were in plays of the time, and she is mute for a long time on stage, until she is left alone with a chorus. Imagine their shock, and the audience's, when she lets out a scream and begins to address them in Greek. I spoke to cultural historian Debbie Chalice.
What Aeschylus did, he innovated a third actor. So until that point, if you went to see the Greek theatre, you'd be used to two actors speaking and a chorus, and the two actors might play different parts. So when Cassandra comes on stage, you assume, or the audience would assume, that, you know, she wouldn't be saying anything. She's literally just there as a kind of walk-on. When the main characters go off and Cassandra's left there and she suddenly does this shriek, I mean, imagine that in the Dionysian theatre. I mean, just that would have been a stunning moment. The first thing Cassandra says is not Greek. She says, "Otototoi papoi da, Apollon, Apollon." And otototo is a scream, it's like a shriek. And of course, when you read modern translations in English, and I assume in modern Greek too, they often, say shrieks, and actually in the Greek, it doesn't say that at all. You have to read that into it. So, and she doesn't just say that once, she says it twice. And then she goes back to Apollon, Apollon. And she's, a barbarian, to use the Greek term. She's from Asia Minor, she's from Troy, and taken to the heart of the Peloponnese.
Otototoi popoida! Apollo! Apollo! Apollo? Then that otototoi all wrong. Apollo hates death notes and dark sorts of song. Otototoi popoida! Apollo! Apollo! Listen, again. Apollo hates the sort of note that comes strangled and anguished out of her throat. Apollo! Apollo! Wake up, destroyer! Again, you're Cassandra's appalling destroyer. She's in a trance about to prophesy. Even in bondage, her gift doesn't die. Apollo! Apollo! Wake up, destroyer! Where have you brought me? What house is this?
Cassandra is the incarnation of that knowledge that Herodotus describes as the most hateful grief of all human griefs, to have knowledge of the truth, but no power over the event.
And of course, another play that Aeschylus writes is The Persian. So he's deeply interested in this kind of tension between, what we might today call East and West. I don't think that's what they would have called it. This tension between, what's literally just over the sea when it comes down to it, and having this woman who is a high priestess and in all likelihood more royal than Clytemnestra. She's the daughter of King Priam. So, she's a massive threat to Clytemnestra. Troy is a much more, it's a city between lots of different worlds. It's a richer city. I mean, that's the implication with the Iliad. So, there's a lot going on there, I think.
Aeschylus's treatment, then, hints at the Cassandra myth being representative of much larger clashes. East and West, mysticism and science, old and new, tradition and disruption. So let me circle back, as promised, to Cassandra's connection with snakes, so frequently part of her depiction, even in modern art. Alexandra explained to me the symbolism of the snake in antiquity.
For that, we have to go a little bit further back in time, in the time that Mother Earth owned one of the most important oracles in ancient Greece, in Delphi. And her symbol that was connected to her chthonic powers that ruled nature was the snake, Python. So Cassandra, depicted with snakes in her hands or her hair, could be connected to this kind of female divinities back then from the previous era. We have them already in Minoic Crete, which is much, much earlier than Delphi in time. And we have female sorcerers that are holding snakes. So we found the same also in Egypt and in Syria. And this has created a debate around these kind of symbols. But Apollo had to actually kill a python to take over the most important sanctuary and oracle in Delphi.
Apollo explicitly kills the serpent, the female mysticism of old religion, in order to take over the most important site of religious power in Greece. And this is part of a systematic slicing up of the Mother Nature deity into constituent elements. Hera represents motherhood, Artemis, nature, Athena has wisdom, Aphrodite, beauty, etc., etc.
So the snake would symbolize the power of Mother Earth, which can be called as Gaia or Ga or Da. And Cassandra could allude to that symbolism and reminiscence people had for this kind of Mother Earth deities.
This connection between soothsaying and the occult, that foresight is connected to chthonic powers, is one that persists almost universally in storytelling. Knowledge of the future is forbidden, therefore wicked. Giuseppe Verdi composes what I am pretty sure is the first horror movie soundtrack, for the witch Ulrica in Un ballo in maschera, a masked ball, to call on the king of the abyss as she prepares to render her predictions. Listen to those dragging strings followed by an actual jump scare, and tell me that it does not contain the seeds of everything from Universal's 30s and 40s classics and Herman's Psycho to Goldsmith's The Omen and Beltrami's Scream. It's him. It's him. I feel the intense pleasure of his terrible embrace, the shape of the future. He holds it in his left hand. Silenzio. Silence. There is then a much more elemental fight under the surface. The discrediting of Cassandra's voice, of women's voices, is essential. And so the elements of her otherness are exaggerated, and no otherness makes her voice easier to dismiss. No otherness is more excluding than the notion of her mental incapacity. Your hair will prematurely blossom white, wrote the 16th century prince of poets Ronsard in his collection Les Amours de Cassandra. You will become a laughingstock. Your descendants will ridicule your sighing. 4 centuries later, Louise Bogan echoes the sentiment in her poem Cassandra. To me, one silly task is like another, she writes. This flesh will never give a child its mother, and madness chooses out my voice again, the shrieking heaven lifted over men. Ruth works with a lot of women who have survived abuse and violence. She sees the psychological effects of not being believed in her practice day after day.
When women are not believed, it is hugely traumatic. I cannot emphasize that enough. That it's one thing to be experiencing or have experienced what you have, which in itself is traumatic, but then to not be believed and to be dismissed as hysterical or overdramatic or causing a fuss, which is just a very low-level way of saying, shut up, stop talking, we don't want to hear this. It has a huge psychological impact.
As a matter of fact, modern psychiatry could be seen as stemming, in part, from an attempt to rationalize disbelief in women's testimony.
And I don't think we can overlook the origins of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis and Freud and hysteria, and this idea that women who are speaking out about things that have happened to them, including sexual violence in Freud's time, that somehow it couldn't possibly be true, that women must be mad, that absolutely still exists today.
This extends to chronic conditions for which the technology of the day cannot find physical proof.
And when people who have a chronic illness are not believed, and I'm very much including myself in this category, I have a diagnosis of ME, and I've also been recently diagnosed with something called functional neurological disorder, which, rather interestingly, is the latest terminology for what we once called hysteria. So had I been born in a completely different time, I would have been called hysterical. What can happen is, and I have certainly experienced this, is you start doubting yourself. You start thinking, maybe everybody else just feels like this, and I'm just too weak. It's hugely invalidating. And I don't think it's a coincidence that there is a lack of funding and a lack of belief by the medical establishment that these conditions are real. It was exactly the same for multiple sclerosis. People who had MS, especially women, were told that it was all in their heads. And it's only because of the technology advancements through MRIs, they were able to pick up that there was a huge difference in the brain of people with multiple sclerosis. And it was believed that it was accepted and was legitimized in the eyes of the medical professionals. And so simply, we are at a stage technologically with medical research knowledge that we do not know yet the causes of, for example, FND or ME, but they are real. And I can say that as a woman who who lives with it day in, day out.
Berlioz, in his grand opera Les Troyens, gets it just right. To describe Cassandra's encounter with her fiancé, Corybus, as a love duet does it no justice. His music is a sort of soothing, loving mansplain. Her music, an increasingly desperate plea to be taken seriously. Cease your looking to the future, he says, and you will be calmer. How is that for systemic ignorance? Blind and deaf like the others, she concludes. She's right, of course. Corybus is dead by the end of Act 2. Even the ancient Greek word for prophet, mandis, comes from the verb menome, to rave, the same root as mania and manic, because divination was seen as a sort of divine channeled madness. In Aeschylus's play, Cassandra could not be clearer to the chorus. She says to them, "You are about to witness Agamemnon's death," to which their response is, "Poor girl, you're mad." It is precisely this close association between having a voice but not being heard, especially when it comes to sexual trauma, and the dismissal of women as mad and inferior, that brings every element of the Cassandra myth together. And it is for precisely those reasons that Virginia Woolf became infatuated with Cassandra's story. Debbie explained that incredible connection to me.
It follows on from the Romantic tradition. You have, Byron and Shelley and Keats all kind of writing about Greece and Italy, and that has a kind of resurgence in sort of the mid-Victorian period. At the same time, you've got lots of excavations. People understand more about classical sculpture and the kind of material culture, the thingness, if you like, of the ancient world. And then you've got other things like the empire and racial ideals and racism, and how Greece and Rome formed ideas about how you should colonize people and manage systems of government. So there's lots going on basically in that period. And I think for Woolf, mainly because she was translating Aeschylus's Agamemnon, and she essentially taught herself Greek with the help of a couple of tutors, actually. And in part, this is a reaction. Women did do classics at, University at Cambridge and Oxford in particular, but they were at a disadvantage because most of them hadn't learned Greek at school. It wasn't seen as appropriate for women to learn Greek. So in some ways, it's a reaction to that. And she was very much taken in an essay she wrote in the mid-20s. She talks about Cassandra's appearance in Aeschylus. And I think Woolf is particularly interested in Cassandra, partly because of that kind of, she's already had several breakdowns. She hears the birds singing in Greek when she has one of her breakdowns. And I think that idea of madness that's associated with Cassandra, and the idea of a woman who is not believed. Well, she does have a voice. Actually, that's the interesting thing. She does have a voice, but nobody wants to listen to her. And I think for Woolf, that's part of women's access to higher education. And then, of course, at the same time, she's writing these kind of memoirs for this kind of biography club that she's part of in the Bloomsbury Group, the wider Bloomsbury Group. And in there, she discloses her own abuse, her own sexual abuse. And so to me, I think that publicly, it's about women's access to culture. It's about understanding Greek. And I think part of it is she associates herself with Cassandra.
The link between Cassandra and sexual violence is superbly brought to the present day in Emerald Fennell's brilliant Promising Young Woman, in which Carrie Mulligan's Cassie, yes, Cassie, vacillates between vengeance and forgiveness, seeking out men who will take advantage of a woman they think is incapacitated and administering her notion of justice after losing her best friend to the trauma of sexual violence. Violence runs through the myth like letters through a stick of rock. I used to tell the future, but they cut out my tongue and left me doing laundry to think of what I've done, sings Florence and the Machine. So they killed Cassandra first, 'cause she feared the worst, and tried to tell the town, sings Taylor Swift. So they filled my cell with snakes, I regret to say. Do you believe me now? It is difficult not to think instantly of the Me Too movement or the case of Giselle Pellicot. Does this mean then that the world is moving on from not believing to believing that women's voices are finally being heard? Not necessarily. Ruth explains.
There is something that is called interest convergence in critical race theory, which is this idea that people, society, will only accept a change when it is convenient for that change to happen, so it will be resisted and resist up to a point. So I do think that in those two examples of Me Too and Pellicot, yes, both are female-led, but we also need to accept that Me Too was seen as very much something that young, beautiful, white Hollywood actresses were pushing, even though we know that Me Too was started by Tarana Burke and by Black women. And again, let's think of the ways in which women's voices are ignored or silenced. If you are an older woman, a woman of colour, a disabled woman, a woman who is working class, then your voice is especially not going to be heard.
The existence of interest convergence in those cases, then, is neither guarantee nor even indication of a pattern. It is by no means universal. The status of the prophetess as an outsider or an insider, as working with the system or against it, is still the most crucial element. Debbie talked to me about one of the more eye-catching retellings of the ancient Greek myths, Netflix's Chaos.
Chaos is the retelling I really enjoyed most recently. It's always baffled me doing the classics, thinking how pernicious these gods are. Especially when, I was brought up as a Protestant Christian and my dad was a vicar, and the idea of these kind of gods that just toy with humanity, they have really what we would consider compassion. And so actually to see Chaos really get that. And Cassandra in that is played by Billie Piper as a kind of shoplifting, mad bag lady who, again, is not believed. It's a very interesting take on what would happen if we were still following those religious motifs.
Excuse me, ma'am. Did you want that as well? The pomegranate?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Happy Olympia.
Sure.
Get off, please! Get off! Get off me! Let go! Get off me! Get off! Get off!
What are you doing?
She's a thief.
Oh, everyone was pleased.
What did she take?
Cat food.
Everyone steals. Even the gods steal, especially the gods. They're stealing.
Oh, so you're
ourselves.
blaspheming now, too.
Lies, lies, lies.
Look, it's my fault. I will pay for that.
Why don't anyone listen?
Can I just, I'll pay for it.
Nobody listens.
Are you okay?
Nobody believes a word I say, but it all comes true. I told them about the horse. I told them about the men hidden inside. I told them.
You could argue it's a bleak view of life, but you could also argue it's a more realistic view of life because in some way there's no fairness. And it's something actually, again, the Victorians struggled with. So Matthew Arnold's poem, Dover Beach, Sophocles heard it too. And he's sort of saying the Greeks had these problems with these gods. I mean, how could they believe something when there's no justice? For less traditional Victorians, that's part of why the Greeks appealed to them, because there was a different way of thinking. And in an age of doubts, when you're thinking about evolution and Darwin's sort of theories are coming out, so part of it maps into a kind of a religious tension at the time as well. These things come in cycles and there's different ways. And I think in some ways at the moment what we're in is a bit like Virginia Woolf with, women in higher education and as well as women talking about what actually happens to them. We're in that now as well. We're struggling with ideas of gender, that society didn't always use a certain terminology for everything, and power and who has the power.
In Euripides' play Trojan Women, however, Cassandra is talking to her peers. There is no language barrier, no disqualifying status, no bias. She's still not believed. The nature of the information matters too. regardless of the medium. The inconvenience of the truth being spoken is directly proportional to the ferocity of its rejection. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the environmental movement. Linda explains one of the smartest deployments of the tale.
A real good example is in the film Don't Look Up. Jennifer Lawrence plays a character who discovers a comet heading to Earth alongside a male colleague played by Leo DiCaprio. He says, don't worry, nothing's going to happen. This is going to pass us by. We're not going to be hit by it. She, on the other hand, says, no, we are heading for destruction. This is a planet killer. We must do something about this. The Leo DiCaprio character is given all of the adoration and acclaim. Women want to sleep with him. On the other hand, she is basically called mad, crazy, not believed. She's pushed away from her whole discovery, and everyone just chooses not to listen to her because she is the harbinger of bad news. She's a woman telling people that everything they know is going to disappear, and people just choose not to listen. I think that is a very clever way of working the Cassandra myth into the modern context. Actually, environmentalism in general is a really good parallel for people kind of screaming, this is happening, and being dismissed as, hysterical outsiders. So can I say exactly how much of Cassandra curse is down to her sex and how much down to this difficult message? No, but I can tell you that a man with an easy lie will always be believed above a woman with a hard truth.
Does that mean Cassandra is science, then, in a modern context, trying to be heard over a chorus of disinformation? Or the voiceless refugee or oppressed minority drowned out by populism? Or long COVID sufferers being told their condition isn't real? She's all of those things. She's the voice of the outsider, telling us the thing we really do not wish to hear, but she is, above all, the voice of woman. And in its ancient context, she was one battle in a huge war being waged. A perfect example of a simple concept that will manifest again and again on this program, that our understanding of the ancient world and its tales is not a static discipline that simply stopped developing on the day we left school. Digging into these myths, armed with the latest information, can alter our perception of everything we thought we knew about them.
Time in archaeology is very relevant because as archaeology yields many more new things as we go, new interpretations come along. So the Palace of Knossos, for example, has been revisited by archaeologists in recent years, and new things have come out. And it seems that we have very few male figures in the early times that can be connected to that early period of the Minoan civilization. And the so-called goddesses with bare breasts carrying snakes in their hands were maybe not just priestesses at the palace of a great king, but something more than that. Maybe they were actually the power, the one having the power in their hands.
What then if power and authority actually rested with the queen? What does that do to our romantic ideas about the Trojan War?
One might think, well, why would such a big expedition start and last about 10 years to just save a beautiful maiden and the honor of her husband Menelaus? It really seems excessive. What if power rested with Helen? Just as Clytemnestra and Penelope, they were the ones holding the real power. I mean, think about all the suitors that were waiting for Penelope in 20 years. What did they wait for? They need the queen. So then the Trojan War becomes for me an expedition to bring back Helen because she had the power and the authority, and that was stolen. So Cassandra, as a princess of the royal family of Troy, who is also a mystic, and that creates a lot of fear, was a part of this powerful order. So what if through conquering Troy, the Greeks conquered the female power of nature?
The writer André Gide wrote that everything that needs to be said has already been said, but since no one was listening, everything must be said again. And this, I think, contains the most vital reshaping of this ancient story. Clarity of vision and the knowledge it brings is every Cassandra's burden. But the inability to hear her and believe her, that's not her curse, it's ours. Podyssey is an audio production by Cooler Heads, written, produced and presented by Alex Andreou. Executive producers Naomi Smith and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sanghita. Artwork by Simona Canello. It is a co-production with Sunstone Global.